Flicka by Mary O'Hara. Chapter 28. Nell was counting the days until the hay crop should be in, the haying crew gone, and she would have time to breathe again. She lived in the hot kitchen, or in the car, driving back and forth to town for supplies. When supper was over and the dishes washed, she had a few hours for herself. She would have a tub full of water waiting for her upstairs, would run up, slip off her kitchen smock, and step into the water, then dress in fresh clothes, her cool grey linen slacks and blouse, and wander off alone into the woods for refreshment and solitude. One night she decided to go up to the stable pasture, her favourite haunt. At the last moment, thinking of the meals for the next day, it occurred to her that a fricassee of cotton-tails would be nice for a change. So she took one of the 22s out of the gun rack in the dining room, filled the pocket of her slacks with shells, and headed for the stable pasture. An hour later she came hurrying back through the gorge. Her face was very white, and the pupils of her eyes distended. She cast a glance over her shoulder, then stopped and half-turned and peered into the darkness that was gathering between the cliffs and under the aspen. Though there was nothing of a frightening nature to be seen, she whirled and broke into a run, calling, "Rob!" There was a tremor of hysterical excitement in her voice, as with head turning constantly to look over her shoulder, her feet flew down the path. "Rob!" she called again. "The wildcat!" Then, reaching the edge of the green, she pulled up short. Rob was standing some distance off, bawling out Tim. He had not heard her, and Nell tried to assume a calmer demeanour. It would not do to appear before Tim in near hysterics. She went quietly towards them, anxious to reach Rob, to get hold of his hand, or at least to stand close beside him until he should be through talking to Tim. She was ashamed of her fright, but could not control the pounding of her heart or the trembling of her hands. When she had told Rob all about it, she would feel better, she thought. But she stopped before reaching them, because Rob was shouting, "When I tell you to pasture the cows in 17, I don't mean 16. Tim's face was crimson. "The missus told me to put them in 16, Captain." Nell stood there with the little gun in her hand, looking from one to the other, the wind gone out of her sails. "Did you tell Tim to put the cows into 16? Rob shouted. It was a relief to her taut nerves to whip back at him. "I did. Any reason why I shouldn't?" "I say there's a reason," he bawled. "I told him to put them in 17. That's why. Who's running this ranch?" Angrily, Nell answered, "One of the cows is coming in heat, and I don't want her bred by that Hereford bull over the fence from number 17 on Crosby's land. That happened last year. We had a mixed Hereford and Guernsey calf. It's not going to happen again." "Whose business is it to give orders to the men?" roared Rob. "The cows are my job, always have been. You tell me what you want and I'll give the orders." Several of the haying crew were seated on the bench outside the bunkhouse. They could see and hear all that was going on. Nell's eyes filled with angry tears. "I'll give any orders about the cows I want." She turned and ran into the house, sobbing with fury, because of the fright she had had, because Rob was in a nasty mood and she couldn't tell him about the wildcat, because he had humiliated her before the men, and because she had made the mistake of shouting back at him. "Never any use," she muttered as she rushed upstairs. "Just makes him snarl louder." She pulled off her slack suit and began to dress for town. A moment later she heard Rob's voice in the living room, shouting, "Nell!" She did not answer, but slipped on her green silk print, then zipped it up, stopping to wipe the tears from her face again. "Nell!" She perched on the edge of the stool before her dressing table and hastily smoothed and arranged her hair, determined not to answer. "Nell!" "What?" Rob could always whip an answer out of her, even against her will. He came stamping upstairs and stood at the door looking at her. Just because he should have been surprised to see her dressing for town at that hour of the night, he said nothing. She volunteered the explanation. "I'm going to town," she said defiantly. "I can't stand it here another minute. I'm going to a movie." There was silence while she finished arranging her hair. Then Rob said, "It's quite cold. You'll need a coat. What one will you wear?" The light green plaid. He went to the closet, hunted in it till he found the coat, took it down from the hanger and was holding it for her when she was ready to put it on. "Got your hanky and some money?" "Yes. Oh wait, I don't think I've got any money." Rob got his wallet out of the coat he had last worn to town and put some bills into her purse. He followed her downstairs and out to the car, took the whisk broom out of the car pocket and cleaned the seat before he'd let her get in. Nell took her seat, her lips set, her eyes determinedly turned away from him. "If he asks me now if I love him, I'll slap his face." She wished he would. He hesitated at the open door after she had taken her seat and started the engine. Then he stepped back, closed the door and stuck his head through the open window. "Don't forget to fill up with petrol in town." Nell made no reply, waiting with exaggerated patience till he should withdraw his head and let her go. "And don't drive too fast." He stood back. Rolling along the Lincoln Highway at about 60 miles an hour, 5 miles faster than her usual pace, she had a delicious sense of escape. There was no wind, a high, thin mist dimmed the stars, and the dark plains, full of mystery and melancholy, spread north and south from the highway into infinite remoteness. Now and then her headlights flashed into the eyes of a Hereford steer standing at the fence of the right-of-way. She met a train coming up from Cheyenne. Its headlights blinded her and she slowed down while the long row of windows passed. In Cheyenne she crept along the streets, marveling at the neon lights that outlined the features of every booth, hot dog stand, shop and restaurant. The streets were almost as bright as day. The crowded, ugly little western town changed her mood. Her own life, the life of the ranch and the outdoors and Rob and the boys, was cut off sharply, as, in putting together the scenes of a moving picture, the film upon which one scene is photographed is cut with a pair of scissors, and another scene is attached to it with glue. She yielded herself with relief to this different world, and it played upon her nerves in a stream of soothing, meaningless impressions. At the theatre, she saw Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire in a dance team picture, and here she was lost in delight. Her real life was completely erased. Back again in the days of college proms and holiday dances, she danced the hour through, and came out of the theatre in a daze, hardly knowing where she was, or at what point her life was to be picked up again. Now she must get home. It was nearly 11 o'clock. On the highway, she ran into what at first she thought was smoke from a train, then realized it was fog. While she had been at the show, this cloud had crept in from somewhere, and now lay upon the road between her and the ranch. To make that drive through fog even in daytime was hazardous and difficult. At night, it was dangerous. Several times Nell stopped the car, wondering if she would be wiser to return to town for the night. But everything drew her forward. She must get home. She longed to feel the familiar arms of the ranch close around her, She had so much to tell Rob. Must tell him about this fog, too. He probably was worried to death. He'd hate to have her driving home alone through the fog late at night. It took her a long time. She had to open the window, hang her head out, looking down at the front wheel, trying to keep it right on the centre line of the road. It seemed 3 times the actual distance of 25 miles before she turned off the highway and drove in under the Goose Bar Ranch sign. She wondered if Rod would have gone to bed. At least he'd have left a light downstairs in the living room for her. Yes, there was the light. She left the car on the hill behind the house, went around to the terrace and looked in the door. Rob was sitting in the armchair by the radio, absorbed by a playlet he was listening to. One knee was hooked over the arm of the chair. His boots were off, slippers on the heather-brown socks that were drawn up over the cuffs of his riding breeches. He was smoking. His brown face looked shadowed and tired. The dark beard showed through on his jaws. Seeing her, he smiled and nodded, then held up a hand for silence, not wanting to miss a word of what he was hearing. "Mind if I hear this out?" he said softly. "Not at all," Nell answered stiffly, and went upstairs to bed. Half an hour later he lay in bed beside her, smoking a last cigarette in the darkness. It seemed to him that the walnut bed was vibrating slightly. The tremor emanated from Nell. Lying there, her back turned to him, she was tense from the back of her neck to her toes. Rob finished his cigarette, ground out the stub in the ashtray on the table, then rolled over and put his arms around her. He held her tight to him, one arm under her neck, while the other hand he pressed her head against him, smoothed her hair, laid his cheek against it, as he so often did, kissing it softly. It took a long time for her trembling to stop. When it had, he said quietly, "What frightened you up in the stable pasture?" She didn't answer. "Was it the wildcat?" "Yes." "I heard you shoot twice. Did you get a shot at him?" "No, that was cottontails I was shooting at." "Did you get the cottontails?" "I shot them, but the mountain lion got them." "What happened?" "You know the rock up there that I call the Sunset Rock, because I so often climb up at it to look at the sunset?" "Yes, the one in the woods a little way, that comes up out of the earth sharp and jagged, like the top of a mountain poking through." "Yes. Well, I had shot the 2 rabbits, and the light was fading and there were beautiful colours in the sky. I thought there must be a fine sunset if I could get up out of the woods to a high place and see it. So I thought I would climb up the Sunset Rock. It's so steep in places. You have to go up on your hands and knees, you know, hanging on." "I know." "So I set the .22 against a pine tree near the base of the rock and tied the legs of the 2 rabbits together with that narrow black ribbon I had around my hair. And I hung them on a jagged stump of a branch that stuck out of the trunk of the pine tree." "How high up?" "Not very high, just opposite my face. And then I climbed up over the rock and stood up there looking at the sunset. When it was over, I came down on the opposite side of the rock and walked around the base of it to the place I had left the gun and the rabbits. But before I got there, I met the lion face to face, not 10 feet away. He was coming around the rock too, and he had my rabbits in his mouth." "I'll be." "We just stood facing each other." "Were you scared?" "Not then, just surprised. We neither of us moved for a moment. Then he just melted away. It was getting dark. It just seemed as if I blinked my eye and he was gone. I stood listening, couldn't hear a thing. Then I got terribly scared and started to run home. Then I remembered I shouldn't run, and I tried to walk. I kept looking behind me. I was in a regular panic." "I knew he was around here." "How do you know?" "I saw footprints the other morning." "Where?" in the corral. In the corral? Yes, for perfect prints in that patch of earth that gets the dampness from the water trough. Nell was silent, thinking of the cat stalking out from the woods across the open space to the corrals. She saw it vertical upon the fence bars, the feral shape, crawling over the top, dropping soundlessly down into the enclosure. It went about sniffing, investigating, now and then pausing to listen, and every turn of the head, every attitude, every pause, half crouched, tense, alert, expressed the primal fear in which it had been formed and matured. Don't be afraid, honey, don't worry. Rob's hand held her head against his breast. No, but Flicka, you know, and if anything happened to her, Ken. Nothing's going to happen. Nell, they've been around before. We've seen the prints, we've heard them scream. They come and go. It's seldom that they hang around close to a human habitation. The stable pasture, that's pretty close, Rob. There's lots of game up there, Nell. The woods are full of deer. It was true. Several of the hay crew had told of seeing deer when they went up to the stables early in the morning, and Nell herself, one day, just pretending that the shape of some twigs and branches and little shrubs were the delicate shapes of deer, suddenly saw that it was true. A group of 5 does and fawns stood there motionless under her eyes. It's strange that the men didn't see the prints of the mountain lion too. Gus saw them. He was with me. I told him to rake them over. I didn't want the men to see them and talk about it. Because of Ken? Yes, he's gone through enough this summer without lying awake worrying about the cat, with school only 10 days away. At that moment they both jumped, and Rob leaped half out of bed. A scream tore the air, rising from the hill across the green, going up in a snarling crescendo to a pitch of ear-splitting ferocity, then ebbing slowly away in heart-rending sobs. Profound silence followed, the deep stillness of the range, as if it had never been broken. "Gah!" explained Rob. He struck a match, lit the candle by the bed, and turned to look at Nell. She was sitting bolt upright, her eyes wide and dark, and her lips parted in an expression that was slightly hysterical. "Did you ever hear such a sound?" she said. Rob shook his head. Then a moment later said, "Beautiful, wasn't it?" Nell nodded violently. It was gorgeous. They sat still, listening, wondering if the cat might scream again, while the flame of the candle flickered and the long shadows danced on the ceiling and walls. Nell slipped out of bed. "Give me the candle, I just want to see if that woke the boys." She came back a moment later. "Both of them dead to the world. We won't tell them, Rob." "Of course not." "I wonder if any of the men heard." "Not a chance, it's midnight. Listen, what do you say we go downstairs? I can't sleep after that. I'll make you some hot chocolate. I think you should have had something to eat anyway, after your evening in town and the long ride back. What did you see? A good show?" They belted robes about them, went down to the kitchen, and Rob made chocolate. For each cup, 1 square of bitter chocolate and 2 spoons of sugar, and a cup of milk, cooked together until it boiled, a thick, smooth drink, topped with Guernsey cream. They sat down at the table to drink, and Nell had a chance to tell about the show, about the fog, about what she had seen in town. She never felt that she had quite completed an experience until she had shared it with Rob. When they went up to bed an hour later, all her nervousness was gone. As she blew out the candle, she said, "Drat that wildcat, he's got my hair ribbon." That's the end of chapter 28.